The acrid reek of my burned-down house still clung to my hair when she strutted into my courtroom like she owned it. I sat there, Judge Miriam Blackwood, black robes, gavel in hand, staring at the woman who had just committed arson against a sitting judge. The audacity made my jaw tighten. But Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea what she had walked into. See, when you torch a judge's home, you'd better pray she never gets the chance to return the favor legally. And honey, I was about to serve her a 5-course meal of justice with a side of federal prison time. This HOA queen thought burning down my house would silence me. Instead, it ignited a fire inside me that would scorch her entire criminal empire. Every illegal fine, every fake violation, every intimidation tactic, I had it all meticulously documented. What would you do if the person who destroyed you handed themselves to you on a silver legal platter? Because my revenge wasn't going to be quiet. It was going to be brutal. 6 months before my home became a crime scene, I was still Judge Miriam Blackwood, respected, feared by criminals, and utterly broken. I had just buried Harold, my husband of 28 years, after cancer devoured him piece by piece. Our 1940s craftsman in Pinewood Estates felt less like a house and more like a tomb. Pinewood used to be a haven where blue-collar families raised kids and retired teachers tended flower gardens. But then money swept in. Modest ranch homes vanished, replaced by gaudy McMansions with 3-car garages and wine cellars. Old-timers like Walt Henderson, who'd lived there since '65, watched their property taxes skyrocket while newcomers whined about neighborhood standards. Leading this suburban gentrification army was none other than Bryn Ashworth Sterling. Picture every entitled suburban nightmare you've ever met, then add designer athleisure and a god complex. At 45, she rolled around in a silver Tesla worth more than most people's salaries, clutched $20 superfood smoothies like trophies, and lectured everyone on how they were living wrong. She and her contractor husband had moved in 2 years earlier, immediately announcing their mission to elevate Pinewood to its full potential. Translation: eliminate the undesirables. My first run-in with Bryn came while I was building Harold's memorial fence. We'd planned it together in his final months. A 6-foot barrier of privacy, our sanctuary where we could drink coffee and watch the sunrise without prying eyes. His roses still bloomed, their scent thick in the morning air as I worked. Then I heard it, the crunch of expensive boots over fallen leaves. You must be the widow. No condolences. No introduction. Just a cold assessment. Judge Blackwood, I corrected, brushing soil from my hands with deliberate calm. Right, the judge, she said, dripping disdain as if my title were a disease. I'm Bryn, HOA president. We have a problem. Out came her weapon of choice, a pink tape measure. The metallic snap of it extending cracked through the quiet like a whip. She measured my fence with exaggerated precision, lips pursed in fake disapproval. 6 foot, 2 inches. Our regulations clearly state 6 feet maximum. That's a $500 violation, plus immediate removal costs. I rose slowly, my spine stiff from sleepless nights and grief. Show me that regulation. Her manicured fingers flipped through a leather portfolio, nails clicking like tiny gavels. 5 minutes later, she found nothing, because the rule didn't exist. My fence measured exactly 6 feet. I had hired a licensed surveyor to ensure it. Well, she huffed, her spray-tanned face flushing red. We'll see about that, Judge. Her venom revealed the truth. This wasn't about fences. It was about revenge. That evening, over microwaved leftovers and Harold's favorite bourbon, I searched court records. Bingo! 3 years earlier, Sterling Premium Builders, her husband's company, had landed in my courtroom for trying to scam an 80-year-old veteran out of $30,000 for fake emergency roof repairs. The roof had been perfectly fine. I'd ruled against them hard and even referred the case for contractor fraud investigation. Now Bryn was back to settle the score. But she'd made a fatal mistake, targeting a woman who had sentenced murderers, rapists, and con artists without flinching. A woman who had already endured watching her soulmate die with dignity. She thought a fence would break me. She had no idea what I was about to unleash. A woman with absolutely nothing left to lose and complete mastery of the legal system. That's what Bryn had just picked a fight with. My palm against the rough grain of Harold's fence posts reminded me why I'd built this barrier. Not to shut the world out, but to guard something sacred. Our memories. Our love. Our final project together. And Bryn Ashworth Sterling had just declared war on a federal judge's sanctuary. In my courtroom, there's a technical term for that kind of stupidity: Exhibit A in a federal case. She had no idea what she had unleashed. Within 2 weeks, Bryn escalated into what I could only describe as psychological warfare disguised as HOA enforcement. It was like she'd memorized the petty tyrant's playbook and decided to run her own pilot program on me. Certified letters started arriving like clockwork, manila envelopes so thick my mailman delivered them with an apologetic wince. 7 registered notices in 10 days, each one more ridiculous than the last. Violation notice number 1, unapproved decorative garden feature. The offense: Harold's memorial stone. A simple granite marker carved with the words "in memory of love that grows eternal." Apparently, grief monuments violated Pinewood's uniform landscape aesthetic. Violation notice number 2, non-regulation mailbox color. My black mailbox had been standing there since the Reagan administration, but suddenly it was creating visual discord. Then came violation number 3, the one that made my teeth grind: excessive bird feeding creating nuisance conditions. My modest feeder attracted cardinals, Harold's favorite birds. Watching them each morning had become my ritual, the steam from my coffee mixing with mountain air as I pretended he might still walk up behind me. Each letter demanded fines between $200 and $500, threatening liens and legal action. The stationery they were printed on probably cost more than most of the so-called violations. But here's where 20 years on the bench came in handy. I knew Colorado HOA statutes like scripture, thanks to a crooked landlord who once tried similar intimidation during law school. Bryn's letters were riddled with legal holes bigger than a mobster's alibi. HOA fines had to be reasonable, tied to real violations, and backed by properly adopted bylaws. Her notices cited rules that didn't exist and skipped mandatory hearing procedures entirely. Time for judicial payback. For 3 nights straight, I worked in Harold's basement office, surrounded by his old legal books and the faint, musty scent of well-worn volumes. I built my counterattack brick by brick, a formal complaint to the Colorado Real Estate Commission outlining Bryn's procedural violations, photos of every square inch of my property, spreadsheets cataloging her illegal fine patterns. My training in evidence preservation wasn't just professional anymore, it was personal. But Bryn wasn't done playing amateur tyrant. On a Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing drunk drivers, my new security cameras recorded pure criminal stupidity. Bryn arrived with an entourage, her interior designer, a skeletal woman draped in all white, and her personal trainer, apparently moonlighting as an inspector. For 2 hours they manufactured evidence of fake violations. The designer gestured dramatically at Harold's prize roses, as though 15 years of careful cultivation personally offended her sense of minimalism. The trainer, clearly better at counting representatives than citing statutes, scribbled notes on an official-looking clipboard. That evening, I watched the footage with mounting rage. They weren't just harassing me, they were fabricating fraudulent documentation to back fraudulent fines. In my courtroom, that's called conspiracy to commit fraud. Then came the knock. Walt Henderson, my neighbor since the Johnson administration, stood in the cool evening air, pipe smoke curling between his worried words. "Judge, this Bryn woman's been targeting folks. Remember the Rodriguez family? She forced them to take down their Virgin of Guadalupe statue. Called it non-conforming religious imagery. Hit them with $800 in fines before they finally sold and left." My judicial instincts flared. What else? The single mom down the street, she got fined for her kids' chalk drawings on their own driveway. Said it was defacing common area aesthetics. We're talking rainbows and hopscotch squares, Judge. The pattern crystallized in my mind like evidence falling neatly into place during closing arguments. Bryn wasn't just after me. She was running a systemic harassment campaign, targeting anyone who didn't fit her picture of a suburban master race. Hispanic families, single mothers, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and now, a widowed judge who'd once ruled against her husband's shady contracting schemes. This wasn't neighborhood standards. This was discrimination weaponized through HOA bureaucracy, wrapped in fraudulent documentation, and enforced with illegal fines. My fence dispute suddenly looked like jaywalking compared to the larger enterprise I had just stumbled into. The scratch of my pen echoed through Harold's silent office as I documented it all. He always said good legal strategy was like surgery: precise, methodical, and devastating when done right. Bryn Ashworth Sterling's kingdom of petty tyranny was about to undergo major surgery, and I was holding the scalpel. Bryn had made the fatal mistake of targeting someone who knew exactly how to dismantle her operation piece by piece, using the same legal system she had twisted into her personal weapon. Harold used to joke that judges were just referees with law degrees and permanent attitudes. Well, it was time to show this HOA tyrant what happens when you pick a fight with someone who literally writes the rules of engagement. Her next move crossed the line from harassment into felony territory. If fake violations weren't breaking me, she decided breaking and entering might. She struck while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater to 18 months. My security cameras captured every incriminating second of her so-called emergency property inspection, a legal authority that existed only in her delusional imagination. There she was, bold as brass in designer yoga pants, strutting through my backyard like she owned the deed. Pink tape measure in hand, photographing every corner from angles so invasive even paparazzi would have blushed. She pressed her face against my kitchen window, shading her eyes to peer inside, at Harold's coffee mug, still waiting on the counter. The one I hadn't been able to wash since he died. Then came the cruelest act. She deliberately left my back gate wide open. Not an accident. Deliberate. The footage showed her yanking it open, testing the latch to ensure it wouldn't catch, then walking away with a smug little smile. When I got home that night, drained from testimony in a domestic violence case, I found my sanctuary violated, and my worst nightmare realized. Gavel was gone. Gavel, my 14-year-old tabby. He wasn't just a pet, he was Harold's last gift to me, rescued from a thunderstorm in a courthouse parking lot 3 years ago. The cat who curled in Harold's lap during chemo, purring comfort into pain. My last living tie to 28 years of marriage. Panic ripped through me like a physical wound. I spent 3 days calling his name through alleys and storm drains in a 6-block radius. Walt Henderson organized search parties. Even the Rodriguez family, driven out months earlier by Bryn's harassment, returned to help. Then came the phone call that froze my blood. "Judge Blackwood? This is Dr. Martinez at Mountain View Animal Emergency. Someone brought in a cat matching your description. He's in bad shape." I found Gavel barely conscious in an oxygen tent, ribs broken, dehydrated, traumatized beyond recognition. $800 in emergency surgery later, the vet gave me the report that made my hands shake with rage. These injuries are consistent with being chased by machinery. High-powered leaf blowers, maybe lawn equipment. The stress alone nearly killed him. The footage told the story. 1 hour after Bryn trespassed, her landscaping crew arrived with industrial leaf blowers, terrorizing my fragile old cat through the open gate she'd staged as an escape route. They chased him 2 blocks until he collapsed into a storm drain, broken and dying. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder of my family. But here's where Bryn made her fatal mistake. She had committed multiple felonies against a sitting judge who knew exactly how to weaponize the law for maximum destruction. I changed every lock, posted no trespassing signs, and filed criminal charges for unlawful entry and animal cruelty. Then I called Channel 7's Sarah Morgan, a pit bull of a journalist known for gutting suburban corruption. 3 nights later, Judge versus HOA, when Watchdog's attack aired. Sarah's investigation revealed Bryn's systematic targeting of minorities and the elderly, complete with security footage of her trespassing and her cruise attack on Gavel. The community response was nuclear. Donations poured in for vet bills and legal fees. Justice for Gavel exploded across social media. 3 law firms offered pro bono services. The Colorado Attorney General's office called to discuss civil rights violations. And 5 more families stepped forward with horror stories. Mrs. Morgan, forced to remove her late husband's memorial garden. The Johnson family, fined into bankruptcy over their disabled son's wheelchair ramp. Others, punished for no greater crime than not fitting Bryn's pristine vision of suburbia. But the real breakthrough came in my own late-night research. Buried deep in Colorado's property protection statutes, I found my golden ticket. Unlawful entry with intent to intimidate carried the same penalties as burglary. Add animal cruelty, stack conspiracy charges, and suddenly Bryn's landscaping crew had created the foundation for a federal RICO case. That night, as gavel finally purred weakly against my chest, I typed up the criminal complaints that would end Bryn's reign of terror. Harold used to say judges were referees with authority and long memories. Well, Bryn had just tortured a federal judge's family. My response would be biblical. And when she realized her stunt had backfired into federal charges, Bryn detonated her nuclear option, an attack on my career. The complaint arrived Tuesday morning, stamped with Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission letterhead that turned my coffee to ash. Bryn's allegations read like bad fiction. Judge Blackwood abuses judicial authority to intimidate law-abiding homeowners, weaponizing the legal system for personal vendettas that threaten community safety. The evidence was even more laughable. Doctored photographs portraying Harold's memorial garden as blight. Falsified witness statements from her trainer and designer, swearing I'd threatened them. Timestamps so sloppy a CSI tech would have howled. But Bryn's real weapon was the leak. Within hours, partisan blogs blasted headlines, liberal judge terrorizes patriotic HOA. Comment sections swarmed with calls for my impeachment, disbarment, even creative suggestions for punishing activist judges who hate America. For 72 hours, I watched 2 decades of service shredded by people who couldn't spell jurisprudence but suddenly claimed to know constitutional law better than federal judges. Then, salvation arrived, carrying cookies. Patricia Pat Donnelly looked every bit the sweet retired librarian in her sensible cardigan and orthopedic shoes. What she didn't look like was a 25-year FBI veteran specializing in financial crimes. She settled into Harold's chair like she owned it, spreading photographs across my kitchen table like a blackjack dealer. "Judge, I think you should see this," she said calmly. "Meet Bethany Sterling of Phoenix, Arizona. 3 insurance claims in 2 years, a mysterious flood, a convenient electrical fire, and a miraculous vandalism. $400,000 in payouts." And she disappeared just before the grand jury convened. My judicial instincts snapped into gear. Patterns. Always the patterns. This wasn't just Bryn the HOA tyrant anymore. This was Bryn the career criminal. The contractor database was damning, pages marked with notes about electrical vulnerabilities, foundation access points, even optimal fire acceleration patterns. "She's been planning to burn your house down since day one," Pat said quietly. "The harassment was just misdirection while she prepared the perfect arson. Your property's worth $180,000, but Harold's life insurance upgrades raised the rebuild value to $320,000. She's going to claim the fire spread to her property, triggering both policies for maximum payout." My hands trembled as I traced Harold's notes in the margins, electrical upgrades we had worked on together during his final months. Our love, our last improvements to our sanctuary, twisted into Bryn's criminal opportunity. But Pat's final revelation shattered every assumption I'd carried into this fight. She's not just a criminal, Judge. She's a federal fugitive operating under stolen identities, technically still in witness protection. Bryn McKenzie testified against a Detroit fraud ring in 2012, served 18 months, then disappeared from the program in 2015. The implications hit like a gavel to the skull. Bryn had been running organized crime operations under the cover of federal protection, stealing taxpayer-funded identities to commit the very crimes she'd supposedly reformed from. The witness protection violation alone carries 10 years, federal minimum, Pat continued. Add multi-state fraud conspiracy, identity theft, and now attempted arson against a federal judge, she's looking at life without parole. I stared at the photographs spread across my table, families she had destroyed, communities gutted, elderly residents who had literally died from stress-induced heart attacks under her harassment campaigns. My personal nightmare was only the latest chapter in a decade-long federal crime spree. She hadn't targeted me out of petty grudges. She had researched me, Harold's death, my finances, my judicial schedule, even my emotional attachments, to craft the perfect victim profile. But in her arrogance, she'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd chosen to run federal crimes against someone who knew exactly how to coordinate multi-jurisdictional prosecutions with every alphabet agency from FBI to Treasury. It was time to show this predator what federal justice looked like when it became personal, permanent, and merciless. My kitchen transformed into a war room faster than you could say RICO conspiracy. By Thursday evening, Pat, Walt, and attorney Rebecca Morgan sat around Harold's table like avenging angels, surrounded by evidence boxes that could bury Bryn's empire 6 feet under. Rebecca Morgan was a legal predator in designer suits, a former federal prosecutor turned white-collar defense attorney who had never lost a RICO case. She looked like she'd been waiting her whole career for a villain this perfectly prosecutable. She'd driven down from Denver with 3 paralegals and enough legal firepower to flatten a small dictatorship. "Judge, we're not just prosecuting neighborhood harassment," Rebecca said, spreading color-coded flowcharts across the table like World War II battle maps. "We're dismantling a decade-long federal crime spree that's destroyed 15 communities and stolen over $4 million. The smell of fresh legal documents mixed with Walt's pipe smoke as we outlined our 3-pronged assault: federal annihilation, state prosecution, and civil rights demolition. Rebecca's strategy was surgical in precision and biblical in scope. Federal charges first: mail fraud across state lines, 20-year minimum. Wire fraud for electronic HOA theft, another 20. Identity theft inside witness protection, 10 mandatory. RICO conspiracy for systematic community destruction, life without parole." Rebecca smiled like a shark tasting blood. "We're talking federal sentences that'll keep her locked up until climate change drowns the prison." Pat orchestrated federal agency involvement with the sharp efficiency of a retired FBI strategist, making current field agents look like mall cops. Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit, FBI's Interstate Fraud Task Force, every one of them was circling this case like hawks. By sunrise, Bryn would be under more surveillance than a terrorist sleeper cell. My role focused on evidence preservation and victim coordination, areas I'd mastered across 20 years of high-stakes criminal cases. Back in law school, I'd memorized every line of Colorado's Open Records Act after a crooked landlord tried hiding financials. HOA accounts, by law, were fully accessible to residents who knew the right way to request them. We were about to demand 5 years' worth of records and watch Bryn's embezzlement machine collapse under its own weight. Walt's neighborhood intelligence web was our secret force multiplier. 6 decades of trust and connections had grown into an information network that rivaled the CIA. "Every family she's tormented is compiling documentation," he reported, sorting witness statements with military precision. "Mrs. Rodriguez is driving back from Phoenix with 17 witnesses. The Johnsons are keeping disability discrimination files so damning they'll make prosecutors cry tears of joy." Our most satisfying upgrade, though, was technical. Pat had transformed my modest home system into a federal-grade surveillance hub, recording evidence in courtroom-ready clarity. Every lens was positioned for maximum prosecutorial punch. "Here's the beauty," Pat said while tuning audio sensors sensitive enough to capture whispers 3 houses away. "She's actively committing crimes while we record. Every bogus fine, each harassment letter, every HOA fund transfer, real-time federal evidence." Rebecca, meanwhile, unleashed legal protection with the ferocity of someone who specialized in dismantling white-collar predators. Emergency injunctions would freeze HOA accounts by dawn. Criminal complaints would hit 3 jurisdictions at once. Civil rights violations were already on the Attorney General's desk, citing systematic targeting by age and ethnicity. Financial fallout was just as lethal. From my years on the bench, I knew the Homeowners Protection Act forced insurers to alert mortgage holders about fraud probes. Bryn's scams would trigger cascading audits of every Pinewood policy, saving residents huge sums while obliterating her reputation with insurers nationwide. We also prepared for the danger of desperation. Rebecca secured protective surveillance for the elderly and families with kids, knowing cornered fraudsters often turned violent when facing life sentences. By midnight, our operation resembled a war machine designed to annihilate Bryn's empire while shielding every victim she terrorized. The precision was stunning, the scale overwhelming, the outcome certain. "When this is over," Rebecca concluded, her tone sharp with satisfaction, "Ben McKenzie rots in federal max security. Sterling Premium Builders gets liquidated to fund restitution. Every victim collects compensation with punitive damages. And we cement national precedents protecting communities from predators like her." The hum of my upgraded system blended with the rhythmic clicks of my keyboard as I drafted victim impact statements designed to make judges impose maximums. Harold always said patience was more than a virtue, it was a weapon, especially when paired with overwhelming legal firepower at the exact psychological moment. By tomorrow, Bryn would learn the cost of targeting a federal judge's community. It wasn't just reckless. It was life sentence guaranteeing, legacy obliterating, federal prison ensuring stupidity. Her reaction to our strike confirmed she'd moved from petty harassment into domestic terrorism. Her desperation was about to transform my neighborhood into a federal prosecutor's dream crime scene. The attack came Tuesday afternoon while I was downtown handing down a sentence to a domestic abuser, a perfect alibi Bryn had clearly timed using my court schedule. My fortified security captured every incriminating detail in razor-sharp HD. At 2:47 p.m., unmarked trucks rolled up, their crews moving with unnerving precision. These weren't landscapers, they were arson techs. In coveralls, they laid accelerant trails around my foundation, rigged hidden propane near electrical panels, and planted dead brush in patterns that would funnel flames straight toward Bryn's multimillion-dollar claim. The precision chilled me. The intent was unmistakable. And the evidence was devastating. But Bryn's masterclass in stupidity peaked when she arrived with a Channel 7 news crew, pretending she'd received anonymous tips about fire hazards at my residence. "Community safety is my only concern," she declared to reporter Sarah Morgan, while standing on top of her own planted arson setup. When public officials overlook fire prevention, innocent families pay the price. Bryn said it with the arrogance of someone who believed consequences didn't apply to her. The nerve was staggering. The federal charges waiting for her would be biblical. My phone buzzed non-stop as Pat's surveillance web lit up. Walt had caught the entire arson crew on camera from several angles. Mrs. Rodriguez had written down every license plate before they fled. Even our mail carrier had noticed unusual activity and logged it, on what turned out to be the final mail delivery my house would ever see. Then Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived for the inspection Bryn herself had demanded. Morrison was no rookie. 30 years of arson cases made him spot fake evidence faster than a federal prosecutor spots a plea deal. He crouched beside the suspicious accelerant trails and whispered, "Judge, someone's trying to burn you out. This isn't a violation. This is attempted murder." Later soil tests confirmed his suspicion: professionally applied accelerants, propane rigs violating 16 safety codes, and fingerprints matching Sterling Premium's contractors. Every setup revealed expert knowledge of fire behavior, fraud loopholes, and exactly how to engineer a blaze that looked like an accident but guaranteed maximum insurance payouts. Morrison shook his head in disgust. "This isn't sloppy. Whoever planned this knows how to kill people and make it look like faulty wiring." Bryn's desperation hit its peak when Morrison refused to condemn my home. His body camera recorded the moment she slid a thick envelope across his clipboard, her attempt to buy his compliance. The casual bribery transformed misdemeanor harassment into federal corruption charges carrying decades in prison. Calmly, Morrison informed her that bribing a fire marshal was a felony with a 10-year minimum. Her face froze when she realized her words and gestures were preserved in high definition. The neighborhood erupted into action. Pat's intel team uncovered identical arson setups at 3 other homes, families Bryn had targeted for being elderly or minorities. Federal agents descended on Pinewood overnight, documenting what looked less like HOA disputes and more like organized domestic terrorism. Rebecca Morgan unleashed a wave of legal action: federal warrants, frozen bank accounts, RICO charges, and asset forfeiture for Sterling Premium builders. Bryn's carefully planted evidence now stood as ironclad proof of her own conspiracy. That night, sitting among files that guaranteed convictions, I felt both relief and grief. The acrid smell of accelerant still clung to the air, but to me it smelled like justice coming. My hands trembled realizing how close Bryn had come to killing me in Harold's house, our home of decades, filled with memories and his ashes in the garden. She hadn't just planned theft. She'd planned murder disguised as an accident. But arrogance had undone her. Each accelerant trail became damning evidence. Each bribe added years to her sentence. Every silenced neighbor was now a sworn witness. As federal agents prepared dawn raids, Harold's words echoed: "Justice delayed is not justice denied, sometimes it's sharpened until it cuts clean through." Bryn would learn that targeting a federal judge meant consequences beyond imagination. At 3:17 a.m., the nightmare struck. Sleeping at Walt's, since my home was already compromised, I woke to an explosion that shook windows across the block. I rushed to the window just in time to see 28 years of my life consumed by fire. Harold's garden, our kitchen, the bedroom where he'd taken his last breaths, all erased in an inferno. The blaze was no accident. Denver Fire locked down a 3-block radius as investigators documented the controlled demolition. Every detail screamed professional arson. But Bryn had overplayed her hand. The fireproof housing around my security system survived, preserving footage of her cruise entry at 2:45 a.m., her husband hauling accelerants at 3:10. The coup de grace came from insurance investigator Jennifer Park. She uncovered Bryn's paperwork, filed at 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes before the ignition, claiming anticipated fire damage to her own property from flames spreading outward. Park shook her head. She wasn't predicting. She was confessing. That's documented, premeditated murder. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors arrived with coffee, blankets, and righteous fury strong enough to make federal agents pause and take notes. Mrs. Rodriguez clasped my hands, tears streaming. Maya, she tried to kill you. We all saw her planning this murder. Then came the moment destined for federal prosecution legend. Bryn herself appeared at the fire scene. At 4:30 a.m., she arrived in designer athleisure and full makeup, performing concern for news cameras just 50 feet from the house she had torched. Her act was Oscar-worthy in its sociopathic detachment from reality. This tragic accident reinforces why our HOA must maintain strict safety standards, she told Channel 7 with theatrical grief. Judge Blackwood's resistance to proper inspections may have contributed to this devastating loss of life. What Bryn didn't realize was that FBI agents were recording every word for her future murder trial, while federal marshals were already preparing dawn raids on evidence so overwhelming that plea deals were mathematically impossible. The financial investigation uncovered criminal brilliance wrapped in homicidal stupidity. Bryn had embezzled $340,000 in HOA funds to finance professional arson. Her insurance policy valued her home at $2.8 million despite purchasing it for only $800,000. The spreading fire damage claims she had pre-filed would have triggered payouts larger than some countries' budgets. But prosecutors had been monitoring every transaction since Pat's surveillance began. Bank records traced payments to known arsonists. Cell phone data placed both Bryn and her husband at the scene during ignition. Insurance applications brimmed with lies, enough for perjury convictions in every state. Rebecca Morgan's counterstrike was swift and merciless. At dawn, federal marshals arrested both Ashworth Sterlings in nationally broadcast raids. Their assets were seized under RICO. Victims across 4 states promised restitution. Sterling premium was liquidated faster than shredded evidence. The charges were staggering: attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, insurance fraud in multiple jurisdictions, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. They faced life sentences stacked like bricks in a mausoleum. That night, I sat in Walt's kitchen surrounded by agents who had converged from across the country to coordinate the largest HOA fraud prosecution in American history. The smoke still clung to my clothes, but it no longer smelled of destruction. It smelled of justice cooking at full flame. My house was gone, yet Harold's memory lived on in the neighbors who had protected me when his sanctuary couldn't. Bryn had tried to kill me in my sleep and instead produced federal evidence strong enough to bury her until the sun burned out. The quiet sound of handcuffs clicking on televised news felt like Harold whispering his approval from whatever legal afterlife judges occupy. Some battles are worth losing everything to win forever. 7 days later, Bryn Ashworth Sterling entered my courtroom in federal custody. The designer athleisure was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The irony was sharp enough to feel divine, like Harold had orchestrated it himself. The courtroom overflowed. Federal marshals, FBI agents, insurance investigators, prosecutors from 4 states, all present like an army preparing for biblical war. Channel 7's cameras captured every angle. The Colorado Attorney General sat in the front row, drafting notes for new civil rights legislation. Most moving of all, 17 families Bryn had terrorized came to bear witness. The Rodriguezes, the Johnsons with their disabled son, elderly residents she had driven from their homes through campaigns of harassment. Judge Patricia Morrison, presiding after my recusal, opened the case with grave weight. The people of Colorado versus Bryn McKenzie, also known as Bethany Sterling, also known as Rebecca Ashworth, also known as Sandra Mitchell. The list of false identities alone took half a minute to read. The charges: attempted murder of a federal judge, arson, multi-state insurance fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, RICO, identity theft, witness protection fraud, civil rights violations, took 4 minutes more. Bryn's public defender, unlucky enough to draw her case, requested reasonable bond citing community ties and lack of flight risk. Prosecutor Amanda Stevens rose like someone holding a royal flush. Your Honor, the defendant has operated under 6 false identities in 4 states while stealing more than $4 million and destroying 15 communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning her home, then appeared on television blaming the victim for her own near death. Release would be a travesty. The gallery murmured with righteous anger until marshals shifted nervously. Then came the moment documentaries would replay for decades. Bryn herself stood, arrogance intact, addressing the court directly. Your Honor, Judge Blackwood has orchestrated a vendetta against law-abiding homeowners. She has weaponized federal power against citizens exercising legitimate HOA authority. This entire prosecution is judicial abuse masquerading as justice. The silence that followed was absolute. Federal agents exchanged looks that promised still more charges. Prosecutors scribbled notes furiously as the gallery held its breath, waiting for the court's response. Judge Morrison's voice, honed by 2 decades on the federal bench, cut through the silence. Miss McKenzie, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge by setting fire to her home while she slept. You embezzled hundreds of thousands from community emergency funds. You operated under false identities while terrorizing elderly and minority residents. You filed fraudulent insurance claims totaling millions of dollars across multiple states. She paused, letting the full weight of federal law descend like a burial shroud. The evidence against you includes security footage of the arson, recorded bribery attempts, documented harassment campaigns, financial records of systematic theft, and fraudulent insurance applications that constitute federal perjury. You are not a victim of vendetta. You are a domestic terrorist who deliberately targeted a judge's community for systematic destruction. Then came the moment that silenced even the prosecutors. This court has reviewed evidence proving you destroyed 15 communities and displaced over 200 families with identical schemes. Your pattern of exploiting the elderly and minorities amounts to systematic civil rights violations that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of law. Bryn's mask cracked. The certainty of life sentences shattered her sociopathic calm. Her attorney whispered desperately about plea bargains everyone knew were mathematically impossible. Bond is denied, Judge Morrison declared, her voice echoing with finality. The defendant is an extreme flight risk and a danger to public safety. Remand to federal custody pending trial. The gallery erupted in applause federal marshals didn't bother to contain. Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed openly. Walt pumped his fist like a man whose team had just won the World Series. 17 families, once terrorized by Bryn's empire of fraud, watched justice roar to life at full volume. As marshals shackled Bryn and led her away, she turned and hissed at me, her hatred electric enough to power a city. This isn't over, Judge. You'll never prove I specifically targeted you for murder. The courtroom stilled as I rose, black robes carrying 20 years of judicial authority. Mrs. McKenzie, your admission of targeted harassment is duly noted for sentencing. Federal prosecutors now hold documented evidence of premeditated intent. Thank you for removing any remaining doubt. Justice thundered through the chamber like Harold's final approval. 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen, coffee in hand, watching cardinals feast at Harold's memorial feeder while federal maximum security served Bryn McKenzie her daily ration of justice. Life without parole. A concrete cell where domestic terrorists spend eternity confronting their choices. Her trial had been a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's nightmare. Federal jurors needed only 3 hours and 47 minutes, plus lunch, to convict Bryn and her husband, Ashworth Sterling, on every charge. Bryn received life without parole for attempted murder of a federal judge, alongside stacked sentences for arson, fraud, and civil rights violations, longer than the lifespan of Colorado itself. Ashworth drew 25 years for conspiracy, ensuring Sterling Premium's criminal network was permanently extinct. Over $3.2 million in seized assets was distributed across 4 states in the largest HOA restitution case in U.S. history. Every victim family received compensation plus punitive damages, creating legal precedents that shielded communities nationwide from future predators. But Pinewood's rebirth was the real victory. Walt Henderson was unanimously elected HOA president, enacting reforms that made embezzlement impossible. By law, all fines over $50 required community approval, monthly financials were published online, and mediation was mandatory before lawsuits. Most importantly, any board member who discriminated by age, race, or income was automatically removed. The ripple spread nationwide. Colorado passed the Pinewood Protection Act, mandating HOA transparency, limiting fine powers, and establishing state oversight where complaint patterns arose. 15 other states followed, protecting millions from future Mackenzies. The Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship exceeded all expectations. Through documentary rights, book sales, and community donations, $750,000 funded first-generation law students studying community justice and civil rights. This year's star recipient, Maria Rodriguez, once Bryn's victim, now bound for Harvard Law to defend vulnerable families across America. Our annual Pinewood Justice Festival drew thousands. Vendors donated proceeds to neighborhood legal defense funds. Walt's Bluegrass Band headlined while Pat Donnelly packed workshops on financial crime investigations, helping residents in 47 states dismantle HOA fraud. The festival became part celebration, part training ground, fueling a movement that led to 41 criminal arrests across the country, sparing thousands of families from Bryn's fate. Nationally, my career gained recognition for upholding judicial ethics under siege. Law schools invited me to speak on defending community rights without compromising judicial integrity. The American Bar Association established the Blackwood Award for judges who stood courageously against systemic oppression. Yet personal victories mattered most. Gavel the cat had fully recovered, ruling our home with regal disdain that could intimidate even federal marshals. Harold's roses flourished in the memorial garden, fed by community love and protected by new security. Evil had been uprooted, and peace had bloomed where terror once reigned. This evening, golden sunset poured through my new windows while I reviewed scholarship applications with Gavel supervising from his throne. Outside, Pat tended her victory garden, Walt taught neighborhood children harmonica, and families gathered for conversations Bryn's reign of terror had once silenced. The gentle sound of children's laughter had replaced sirens and confrontation, proving that justice wasn't only about punishment, it was about protection, healing, and hope for futures free from suburban predators. Here's my message for anyone still trapped in HOA nightmares or under the thumb of petty tyrants with measuring tapes. Document everything. Organize your neighbors. And never forget, bullies only win when good people stay silent. Your horror story today could become someone else's roadmap to salvation tomorrow. Drop a comment below sharing your own HOA nightmare. You're not alone in fighting these suburban dictators. And smash that subscribe button for more HOA stories, because next week we're exposing the tax assessor who tried stealing an entire neighborhood for personal profit. That revenge was biblical, and the federal charges? Absolutely beautiful. Together, we're building communities where justice triumphs and predators lose, permanently. That's a wrap for today's HOA episode. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, hit like, share your thoughts, and tell us if you faced HOA madness too. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next meltdown we bring to justice.